everyone, welcome to another video. I'm Lauren Macau, and today I'm going to talk a little bit more about all of the data that I collected last year while I was reading all my books. Because I kept quite an extensive spreadsheet and I used that data already to evaluate my 2020 reading and to set goals for 2021. But as I have more and as data is fun, and as it was requested also by you, we now have this video with a little bit more information. So let's dive into it. First of all, a small recap. I have read 150 books, which actually data-wise is great because it means every book is 1.75% of the total, and somehow that makes me happy. I have read, according to Goodreads, 4,601 pages, and 26 books were part of a series, which means 24 were standalones. I don't think this is how you write standalones, but yeah. So about the pages thing, I don't really keep track of pages. Pages don't mean anything to me. I don't know what one page is. So it really depends on the book. You know, sometimes the writing is big, sometimes it isn't. And with one book, I know what one book is, but one page. So I haven't really been keeping track of that. But according to Goodreads again, the shortest book that I read was Lumberjanes, which is a comic and was only 27 pages. I read that one on Scribd, and the longest was apparently Anna Karenina. And I'm quite surprised at that one because for me, the impression that I had was that The Brothers Karamazov would be my longest book, but that's probably because I took a break halfway through The Brothers Karamazov, so it took me a couple of months to read that, and Anna Karenina, I think 2, maybe 3 weeks. But on average, the books were 330 pages, which again, maybe I'm gonna track that this year, because right now it really doesn't say anything. Another piece of information that Goodreads gave me was according to the popularity of the books, and the books that I read that most other people had shelved is The Lord of the Flies by William Golding, and I wonder how big the percentage of this are people that had to read it for school or something. And the least popular was Hufters and Helden by Olaf de Maat, which only 5 other people shelved. And it makes sense because it's Dutch, it's non-fiction, it's not very popular. It wasn't on any news or anything. I got it via a friend who knew the author. And it was only brought out in 2019, but I still think it's interesting. Now let's look at genres. I already talked about this one and the data that will come in the previous video, a little bit about my data, but now let's take the time to dig into it a little bit more deeply, because I showed you the pie chart, and the disadvantage of the pie chart is that it doesn't show us everything. So I also made the table that you can see on your left. Now, so there are quite a few genres, and I'm happy with that. Apparently, I read classics, comics, contemporary fiction, essays, fantasy, folk tales, graphic novels, historical fiction, horror, literary fiction, magic realism, mangas, memoirs, mystery thrillers, mythologies, narrative non-fiction, personal narrative, play, poetry, romance, and science fiction. Quite okay. But when looking at this, what I found interesting, first of all, we have one that I read most of all, which is historical fiction. Not a surprise. But then apparently we kind of have 2 categories. The yellow ones and the white ones. And the yellow ones are books that I read very regularly. So those are the classics, contemporary fiction, fantasy. Well, you can see what the yellow ones are, right? Those apparently I read about 10 to 20 a year. So at least we could say once a month I would read a book from each of these categories, and the other ones, all the white ones, I would read 5 or less in the whole year. And I find it interesting that I have apparently these 2 categories of random things that sometimes I try out and things that I read regularly. That was a pretty interesting conclusion of looking at this data. Now, it was also interesting at looking when I read all of these books. Because, as we all know, 2020 was quite a year, and I was curious to see what impact that had on my reading. In April and May, I really kicked off, and that would make sense because that was when, well, I'm not going to call it lockdown because in the Netherlands we could still go out, but that was when there was a lot of time spent indoors, and I think May is a time where I read quite a lot of comics and shorter stuff, also because I discovered Scribd. I am interested in the fact that, so in October I started a job, and that hasn't really diminished my reading a lot, which is interesting. I'm most surprised at February, where I only read 4 books, and I think that has to do with that I probably read The Brothers Karamazov partly in that time, and that took up quite some time. I think it's more interesting to see what it's going to do this year with now having a job more steadily, because the first few months, so October, November, December, I still had a concussion, so I could still read a lot. So yeah, I think quite interesting, and I'll look at this more often. Now, another question that I asked myself, and this one I already touched upon, is the medium in which I read books. So as you can see from the pie chart and the table with the actual numbers, I read mostly physical books and quite a lot of audio and some ebooks. And the ebooks mostly also are books that I found via Scribd and that I could read on my phone on the go. I think there are only 2 that I actually read on my e-reader. My e-reader has been gathering some dust. It's just not the medium I like most of all. Then I was curious to find out where the books that I read, where they come from. So obviously the audiobooks would mostly come from Scribd or Storytel, which were the 2 platforms that I used last year. I stopped listening to Storytel at one point because they didn't renew their contract with Penguin, and then most of the books I wanted to read weren't on that, so that's when I switched to Scribd. You also see, so this is on the right side of the table, that we have 2 books that I read both via Storytel and on via the library. That was because I was listening to them, and then Storytel was like, nope, these don't exist anymore. And old Scribd are books that I listened to via Scribd, but I actually own and have owned for more than 10 years. So that's what the old category means. It's books that I have owned for before I became a student. Now, as for the other things, ebooks, pretty clear. 9 were gifted to me, which means people know what I want. I like that. 23 were from the library. And I think that is going to grow because I have discovered my library and I'm loving it more and more, although now there is the lockdown thing. There are 3 that I found in Minibeef, so those are the free libraries. There are quite a bunch in the neighborhood, and honestly, I'm surprised these are only 3. I would have imagined them to be more. There are 3 books that I borrowed, 5 books that I bought secondhand, which not bad, but it could be more because apparently I bought 38 books. I was quite surprised at that. I had no idea that I bought so many. So I think, well, I've already started, but really keeping track more of all of the books that I buy because, well, I didn't know there were this much. But I'm happy that it also means that I actually read the books that I buy. And 14 were adopted. So with adopted, I mean that a friend of mine was like, hey, I'm unhauling these books, who wants them? So I'm pretty happy with that number as well. They're quite a lot. And I also looked at, so the chart on the right is when the books came into my life. So NO is for not available, so those are all of the audiobooks or from the library because they weren't books that were actually sitting on my shelves. 7.4% were books that I had pre-2009, so that was when I started studying, so those are all of the old books. There were 5% that I got in 2018, 12%, well 13 in 2019, and 30 nearly that I got in 2020. And I'm actually quite proud of this. It means that, except for the books that I don't own, most of the books I read are ones that came into my life that same year, and I think that's a very good sign. Then I also looked at the publication date. I was curious to see when the books that I read, when they were published. And again, I was quite surprised to see that there were 13 books that were published in 2020. I don't see myself as someone who reads very recent stuff, but apparently I'm doing quite okay on that front. Also 20 were from 2019, so yeah, I'm pretty proud. And other big categories were apparently 31 books I read were published in 2010 to 2015, and 21 came from the second half of the 20th century. And I have no idea why those stand out. Maybe there are series in there somewhere. Now, another big thing, as you all know, that I'm interested in is the languages, because I read predominantly in 3 languages, but I looked at the original languages I actually read them in. So apparently I read 60% books in English, 15 in French, 25 in Dutch, and 0.75 in German, and that is the one German book that I read this year. And when you total up all the things, it means that I read 44 translated books, which is quite a lot, but when you realize that I read 150, it means that it's less than a third. So yeah, do with that when you will. But then I looked at the original languages, and in total there were 20 unique languages. Pretty nice. So these are all the languages, not just the ones that are translated from. So we have the 3 that are stand out, which are English, Dutch, and French. with English standing out way too much, but I already talked about that. And then for the rest, all of the other languages, so Czech, Danish, German, Farsi, German, Hungarian, Indonesian, Italian, Japanese, Kikuyu, Korean, Norwegian, Persian, Russian, Spanish, Swedish, and Taiwanese, I read 1 or 2 books, with the exception of Japan, which I find interesting, for which I've read 4 books that were originally written in Japanese. I have no idea. Do I have some kind of an interest for Japan? Maybe, maybe not. There are 2 mangas in this, so that would probably help. But yeah, I think it's interesting that we have the 3 languages that I read in, and then all of the rest, and just Japan sitting there like, hello, I'm a little outsider too. But yeah, I hope I will read even more unique languages. I think the one that I'm most proud of, if I can say, is Kikuyu, which I think is a language most people don't even know exist. Now, languages, country of origin, they're kind of linked. Languages are spoken by multiple countries, so I always like looking at that again. So I already showed you previously the pie chart showing where the countries are situated, so in what continent. So we can see that Europe is the majority with 53%, and North America then with 29, but there are 40 unique countries, and so if you look at the chart on the right, you see all of the countries of origin. I'm gonna name them because I'm pretty proud of it. So we've got Australia, Austria, Belgium, Britain, Cambodia, Canada, Ivory Coast, Czech Republic, Denmark, France, Germany, Guadeloupe, Haiti, Hungary, India, Indonesia, Iran, Ireland, Israel, Italy, Japan, Kenya, Liberia, Mexico, a mix, Netherlands, New Zealand, Nigeria, Norway, Russia, Singapore, South Korea, Spain, Switzerland, Sweden, Taiwan, Turkey, US, Vietnam, Wales, and Zambia. First of all, mix are books that were written with people from a variety of countries. So we see again the 3 to 4 that stand out with Britain, the US, France, and the Netherlands. And then we have all of the white ones are countries that I've read either 1 or 2 books from, and we have 4 countries that stand out in the sense that I've read more than 1 or 2, but they're not part of the big boys and girls. So those are Canada with 6 books, which can be explained by 3 books that were part of a series that I didn't like. Iran with 4. I'm curious to what those 4 books are. Right now I don't know, and I don't even think I've officially read Japan as part of my reading around the world, so again, interesting. Then we have Japan with 4, so again, 2 manga, and Wales with 3, and those are the 3 books of the Kingsbridge Chronicle by Ken Follett. But yeah, so those are the countries of origin. Then I looked at also whether the author was still alive and what that meant also. 18% of the authors that I read have already passed away. But anyway, those 18% means 27 books were by dead authors. And now, important to say, with authors, I've counted books and not singular authors. So an author of whom I would have read a couple of books will be in there a couple of times. Now, I wanted to compare the information when only looking at dead authors and when taking all of the authors into account. Interestingly, when you look only at dead authors, 70% of them were male, whereas when you look at all of the authors, males only take up 49.7%. Similar thing with whiteness. Dead authors, nearly 82% of them were white, whereas when you look at all authors, it's 70. I read significant amount of the classics that I read were from dead authors, which makes sense. We would have 37% classics when looking only at dead authors, whereas it's only 6.7 when looking at all of the authors. I also read a significant bunch of fantasy by dead authors, and that would be partly the Narnia books. Nearly all of the fiction that I read was by dead authors, nearly 90%, whereas with all of the authors it's 75. So I think it would be quite interesting to look at what those fiction books were by the dead authors, non-fiction I mean. I was quite happy to see that the percentage of French that I read from dead authors is higher, with 39%. I think that also has to do with that when I pick up a classic, I tend to pick up a French one because that is a book that I have, so that would explain this. So I think this is, I don't know, I think it's quite interesting. Last but not least, I also looked at the buddy reads and other projects and what part they make out of my total reading experience. So on the left you see all of my buddy reads, the 3 books I read with a group of friends. We call ourselves the Pataches because we like to eat fries. We read 3 books. Well, I read 3 books. I think there was one that only I ended up reading. But never mind that. There are 6 that I read with Pauline, 5 of which are the Narnia books. 7 were with my book club, the Undercover Book Club. I'm surprised at it being only 7 because there are 1 book every month, so this should be more, and I have no idea where the other ones went. Well, 1 I DNF'd, 1 I thought was not going to be good for me, so yeah, I don't know. 1 book I read with Laura. 1 book I read with a read-along organized by Joytsna from Joytsna's Bookscapades. 1 was a read-along organized by Pauline. Those channels will be linked below. And 1 was with people from my book club, in which I proposed we would read a Russian Mastodon. And I might propose this again this year, although I do feel that reading a Russian Mastodon is something you have to do in the winter, and the winter is coming at an end. Now, the other table, it says buddy reads, it should say projects, but 16 books I read were from Around the World in 80 Books project. This means it's more than once a month, which is okay. And I also made quite a couple of book bingos this year because of the different pandemic things that were going out, and I made them with and for my book club. So the first one was the quarantine book bingo, and I read 23 books specifically for that project. And what was nice about that one is that it really made a dent in my TBR, which was nice. Then we had the second wave book bingo, which I read 7 books for. It should be 9, I think. And the last book bingo that I made, and that is still kind of going on right now, I already read 5 books for that in 2020. And there are 25 prompts in total. Well, I just added 5 last week, but I still have some road to go. Then there were 8 books that I read to educate myself about racism. Racism in the US, but also here in the Netherlands specifically. And that would be non-fiction, but also memoirs to learn about what the Black experience is, what also the Asian experience is, and where things come from. And there were 14 rereads, which is actually a lot more than what I planned in the beginning of the year. So, that was quite a lot of data. If you have anything else that you want to know, if you have any data that you have of your own reading, that you're like, oh, but I do this way, and you want to chat about it, let me know in the comments. And for now, I will see you guys in a next video. Thank you for watching. Bye!